Good day, everyone, or good day, warriors. For today's discussion in the subject CRI 029 with the subject title of Institutional Correction, we will be going to discuss Module number 6, History of Jail and Prison in the Philippine Context. At the end of this module, we must be able or we should be able to satisfy its two learning targets or its two learning objectives. First, we should be able to explain the history or the origin of Philippine prisons and jails, and also compare and contrast the difference between the Philippine prison and its jailing system. For the first part of this module, we have the origin of jail or the history of prisons. Actually, the earliest record of prisons dates back to 1000 BC during the early historical civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, whereas during these times, prisons were mostly detention centers that are built in an underground dungeons. And such underground dungeons is safekeeping or holding offenders until they were sentenced to either death or slavery. And after this ancient civilization or this ancient record of prisons in Mesopotamia and Egypt, prisons in ancient Greece were introduced. Although they give the same function, which is to held the offenders there until they were sentenced or they were punished. During the ancient Greece, prisoners were not just locked inside their cells or inside their dungeons, unlike the earliest record or unlike in the Mesopotamia and Egyptian times. Because during these ancient Greece times, prisoners were actually chained up at their feet or hanggang sa paa nila, or yung paa nila ay naka-kadena using a simple wooden block. Kung nakikita nyo yon or kung familiar kayo dun sa itsura na yon na pang chain or pang restrict ng kanilang mga movements gamit yung kahoy na yon, ang itsura lang nun, it's like a rectangular wood na merong dalawang butas sa gitna para lagayan nung paa or para doon ilagay yung paa nung prisoner. And they are locked up inside their cells. Nakaganon na yung paa nila or naka-chained na yung paa nila using those wooden block habang nakakulong pa sila inside their cells. And this inhumane practice of keeping the prisoners open the ancient Greek prisons. Whereas, in these ancient Greek prisons, or the Greek confinement, it was a bit more humane. Why? Because during this time, cell visits from friends and family were actually introduced. Unlike doon sa mga una nating nabanggit na pinanggalingan ng jails and prisons, wala sila or hindi nila pinapayagan na bisitahin yung mga nakakulong doon or yung mga criminals. But in the ancient Greek, such cell visits were allowed or began to introduce in the prison or jail system. And after the Greek confinement, we have the ancient Romans. Whereas, during those times, or during these ancient Roman times, yung mga cells and or prisons rather, ganun pa din, nakabuild pa rin siya in an underground style or in an underground system. But, not just to gatekeep or not just to safekeep those offenders or those prisoners, but it is intended or it is built in an underground cells for the intention of giving a small, dark, and claustrophobic vibes. Whereas when we say claustrophobic or claustrophobia, it is the fear of confined spaces, which somehow tortures the offenders or the law violators that are held up or held locked up inside. But in some other times, there are prisoners, or during these ancient Roman times, prisoners would be chained to the underground passage walls and not inside their cells. Maybe because of overcrowding or sobrang dami na nung law violator na ikukulong nila during this ancient Roman times. That is why hindi na lahat nakakulong inside their cells. Yung iba, nakatali na lang or naka-chained na lang doon sa mga passage wall papunta doon sa underground cells na yon. And after ancient Romans, we have the or modern concept of prisons that start or take hold in the year 1215. But even though these prisons or these jails were built in a much more modern way than the earliest time of prisons, it continued to be viewed as detention centers rather than correctional institution. Or when we say correctional institution, such prison were built to detain offenders or to safekeep offenders, but not to reform or rehabilitate, which opened to the 19th century time of prison, or the concept of an English jail. Kung saan, in the concept of English jail, dito na nag-start yung ang maging main function ng mga prisons and jail is to not, or hindi lang para i-held or para ikulong yung mga prisons, hindi lang para ilayo sila sa community or sa society, but for an correctional institution function, which is, uulitin ko, to reform and rehabilitate those offenders so that magkakaroon or so that they would have a smooth reintegration within the society or within the community after he or she serve his or her sentence. And of course, after the origin of jail or the origin of prison, the history of prison, we have the jail structures. In this topic or in this discussion, we will explain or we will elaborate how these jail structures evolve and develop all throughout these years. And in these jail structures, we have actually three phases of its architectural design. And let's see kung sa three phases na to, kung each phases ba, they are designed to balance security, the safety, and the rehabilitation efforts based on the specific needs or goals of the correctional system or the prison system. First, in the jail structure, we have the first generation jails or the first generational jails. Whereas, in this first generation jails, these are the type of jails that are actually small and cramped cells or has a cramped cells. Pagka sinabi nating cramped, ibig sabihin it is confined, it restricts the movement of the prisoners that is locked up inside. And actually, it is very uncomfortable. Why? Because the spaces in these cells or in this first generation cells are mostly tight packed, causing claustrophobic vibes. And also, the security measures in these first generation jails are actually limited. Why? Because, syempre, this is the first generation jails. This is the start of the architectural design, or this is the start of how jails, either its system or its facilities, are being managed. That is why, during those time or during these first generation jails, staffing are actually limited or kakaunti pa lang yung mga jail officer natin na tinatawag ngayon during this first generation jails. And since kakaunti pa lang or limited din yung not only the space during the first generation jails but also the officer, nagkakaroon ng malaking gap and problem yung interaction between the inmates and the officer. Since yung mga officer, hindi nila kayang i-supervise or hindi nila kayang i-control yung mga inmates that time na ang ratio is more than 1:1, making the security measures of this type of jails weak. Since first generational jails nga kailangan imag-patrol sila and tignan each cell. Kaya nahihirapan sila na i-supervise or i-manage yung more than one cell or two cells at a time. And such limitation actually gave rise to what we call the second generational jails or the second generation jails. These second generation jails that emerged in the 1960s actually has a much more enhanced security measures. Why? Because during these second generation jails, meron na sila yung parang CCTV room or yung watching room. Kung saan yung watching room, it is called, or yung area na yon, it is called pods. Kung saan doon nila sino-surveillance in a remote manner yung lahat ng inmates per cell. Kaya mas nababantayan nila and mas nakikita nila yung galaw ng mga inmates or yung galaw ng mga prisoner per every cell. And hindi na siya ganun ka-cramp or ka-tightly packed during the first generational jails. But since andun na yung mga jail officer natin sa may room na yon or sa area na yon where they remotely watch the inmates per cell, nagkakaroon ng much more less interaction yung mga inmates than the first generational jails. Nagkakaroon din ng malaking gap yung pagresponde ng mga jail officers natin na yan kapag ka nagkakaroon ng riot or nagkakaroon ng problema yung mga inmates sa loob. Since hindi na nila mismo nakikita yung mga problema na yon face to face. Unlike dun sa first generational jails na nakikita nila kapag ka nagpapatrol sila. And kapag ka nakita nila na may problema, andun na sila mismo in flesh para rumisponde. Pero kasi sa second generation jails, nandoon lang sila doon sa may parang watching room nila to remotely watch the inmates, causing the inmates and the jail or prison staff to be much more separated. And lastly, but not the least, we have the present generation jails. Kung saan, itong mga present generation jails na to, they are built para magkaroon na ng interaction yung inmates sa mga jail officer or sa mga jail staff. Since meron ng professional staffing, meron ng kanya-kanyang officers that are responsible for the supervision and the facility security of the inmates, and also iba na din yung mga officers or yung mga staff na nag-handle ng facility management, paperwork, and the administrative task. And beside from that, kaya mas nagkakaroon ng interaction ng inmates during in this during in the present generational jails due to the fact na ngayon yung mga jail structures natin, they are built to have a different programs and services that can actually help the inmates to reintegrate smoothly or much more smoothly in the society after serving his or her sentence. That is why it is considered to be, or the present generational jails is considered to be much more effective and much more efficient rather than the first and second generational or first and second generation jails. And now, let's discuss the Bureau of Correction. When we say Bureau of Correction, ito yung may function or it is the government agency that is responsible for managing the national penitentiaries and other penal institution. Hindi sila same function with the BJMP, whereas ang hawak naman ng BJMP ay yung mga municipal and city jails. And also, hindi din Bureau of Correction ang may hawak sa mga tinatawag natin na provincial and sub-provincial jails. For provincial and sub-provincial jails are under the local government unit. Now, let's have a brief discussion about the history of Bureau of Correction. Actually, Bureau of Correction is formerly known as Bureau of Prisons, and its main function, or it has a main function, which is to safekeep national prisoners. Bureau of Prisons was actually established on November 1, 1905 under the Department of Public Instruction through the Reorganization Act number 1407. This act actually lays down the foundation for the organization, which is the Bureau of Prison, to manage the country's prison system. And it was renamed to Bureau of Correction, or from Bureau of Prison, it was renamed to Correction on November 23, 1989 under the Section 26 of the Administrative Code of 1987. Whereas this Administrative Code of 1987 emphasized what should be the main function or what should be the main goal of the Bureau of Correction, which is to actually reform and rehabilitate criminal offenders. On May 24, 2013, the Republic Act or the RA number 10575 was enacted. Republic Act 10575 is otherwise known as the Bureau of Correction Act of 2013, whereas this law reflects the efforts to actually address the challenges faced by our correctional system or by the Philippine correctional system and actually align it with the international standards and best practices. Why? This law provides for the reorganization of the Bureau of Correction to actually improve its prison structure, its system, and processes in line with the modern correctional practices. And also, this law emphasizes the need for the modernization of the prison facilities to actually enhance its security, the living condition of the prisoner, and the rehabilitation program for the inmates. And also, take note that this act or Republic Act 10575 actually underscore or it actually highlights the importance of the rehabilitation and reformation program, as it is essential for the components of the correctional system to prepare the inmates for their eventual reintegration to the society or to the community. Bureau of Correction has 7 correctional facilities, namely the New Bilibid Prison that can be found in the Muntinlupa City, the Correctional Institution for Women, which can be found in the Mandaluyong City, the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm in Puerto Princesa City, Palawan, the Davao Prison and Penal Farm in Davao del Norte, Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm in Occidental Mindoro, San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm in Zamboanga City, and lastly, the Leyte Regional Prison that can be found in the Abuyog, Leyte. First is the National or the New Bilibid Prison. The New Bilibid Prison is considered to be the main and the largest prison facility in the Philippines, with its prison compound proper that had an area of 300 by 300 meters or a total of 587 hectares, and has actually the capacity or a capacity of 3,000 prisoners. This New Bilibid prison is located in Muntinlupa, Metro Manila, Philippines, where again it serves as a major or the major penitentiary and houses a large number of inmates. In fact, before we have the New Bilibid prison, meron tayo yung tinatawag natin na Old Bilibid prison. But with the Commonwealth Act number 67 or with the enactment of Commonwealth Act number 67, New Bilibid prison was founded. It actually appropriates 1 million pesos for its construction. And yung mga inmates dati or yung mga inmates na nasa Old Bilibid prison, they were transferred to the New Bilibid prison on November 15, 1940. And also, additional information, New Bilibid prison actually consists of several compounds, which is the maximum security compound, the medium security compound, and a minimum security compound. Kung saan, itong mga compound na to, they are designed to house individual offenders with different security classifications that are solely based on their offenses and their behavior within the prison system. And second, we have the correctional institution for women that is located in the welfare bill at the Mandaluyong, Rizal. It is actually noted that before a separate building was constructed, especially for the women prisoners, all female convicts were confined at the Old Bilibid prison on Asgaraga Street, Manila, and these prisoners were confined in dormitories near the women's quarter. Because of these conditions, vocational activities for the women prisoners were actually limited to embroidery. Not until this correctional institution for women has been built, which was on November 27, 1929 by the virtue of Act number 3579, to be the first and only prison for women in the Philippines. And also, by the virtue of this act or Act number 3579, it authorized the transfer of all women inmates to a building in the welfare bill at Mandaluyong, Rizal, which is what we call the correctional institution for women, and appropriated 60,000 for its construction. But because of the overpopulation of the number of women prisoners, a correctional institution for women in Mindanao was actually established on September 18, 2007, 75 years later, after the correctional institution for women has been founded or established. And this correctional institution for women in Mindanao was established by virtue of a Department of Justice order within the sprawling prison reservation beside the Davao Penal Colony in the eastern Mindanao. And this correctional institution for women has actually a prison compound proper of 11 hectare. And we have the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm or the Iwahig Penal Colony, which is formerly known as the Luhit Penal Settlement. Whereas it was first established during 1904 by the Americans with only 28,000 hectares. But in the late 1950s, it expanded and became 41,000 hectares by the virtue of Executive Order number 67 on October 15, 1912, making it or considering it to be the biggest penal facility in the country. And this Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm is actually situated in the Puerto Princesa, Palawan City, Philippines, where it is also called the prison without walls. Why? Because one of the distinctive features of this Iwahig Prison Penal Farm or Iwahig Prison Penal Colony, inmates are, yes, inmates are not confined within traditional cell structures because it is considered to be an open prison system. Since instead of putting those prisoners inside the cells and lock them, they actually live in colonies and engage in agricultural work with the prison farm, making the inmates or the prisons residing or being held inside the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm actively involved in farming, agriculture, and related activities, which make this kind of approach provide more meaningful work and skills development that contributes to the self-sufficiency of the prison and also the inmates. And since it is considered to be an open prison system, actually, Iwahig Penal Colony operates on a system of self-governance among the inmates. There is actually a minimal presence of armed guards within the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm. The prisoners themselves are in fact responsible for maintaining the order within the facilities. But of course, for the security measures, inmates at Iwahig are also classified based on their behavior and the nature of their offenses. The institution actually has different zones or areas for various security classifications, and similar to other correctional facilities or to other national penitentiaries, Iwahig also offers rehabilitation programs that includes education and skills training to also prepare the inmates for the reintegration in the society. And also take note that this penal farm has actually gained attention as a unique tourist attraction. Visitors actually have the opportunity to tour the facility and witness the open prison system in action. Whereas, ang goal dito or ang aim dito ay to actually promote the understanding and the support for the rehabilitative efforts that takes place in this Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm. Of course, also with the efforts of the inmates and its jail officers or the prison officers. And after the Iwahig Penal Colony, we now have the Leyte Regional Prison. This regional prison is considered to be the youngest among the Bureau of Corrections penal colonies, as it was created by virtue of Presidential Decree number 28 and was established on January 16, 1973, making it a martial law baby. And this regional prison is actually situated on a 861 hectares forested area on top of a mountain surrounded by mountain ranges in the Abuyog, Leyte, specifically in the Barangay Mahagna. That is composed of two communities, the enclosed community and the open community, whereas prisoners who are in the enclosed community of this regional prison are those who belong to the medium and maximum security, while prisoners who are in the open community belong to the minimum security. And also take note that this prison actually admits convicted offenders from Region 6 and from the National Penitentiary in Muntinlupa. Hindi lang siya naka-restrict or naka-limit doon sa mga prisoners or offenders in the Leyte region. Because even though it is situated in a remote municipality of Abuyog, Southern Leyte, it is also idealistically an almost complete organizational complacement or confinement than the other national penitentiaries. And now we have the Davao Penal Colony, which is situated in Panabo City, Davao del Norte, on the southern island of Mindanao. Whereas this penal colony or this prison, this Davao Penal Colony was established with the issuance of a presidential proclamation number 414, and it is actually during the World War II, whereas the entire facility was closed and transferred to the Iwahig Penal Colony. The Davao Penal Colony became the biggest and largest Japanese Imperial Army garrison not only in the Philippines but also in all occupied territories of Japan in the Southeast Asia during World War II, and hundreds of American prisoners of war perished in the jungles of the Davao Penal Colony, because similar to the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm, Davao Penal Colony also has an open prison system where inmates are involved in agricultural activities. And its area is considered to be much more remote and has a jungle vibe during the World War II times, making hundreds of American prisoners suffer or tortured. And also, this Davao Penal Colony is considered a self-sufficient prison farm because it has a goal of achieving the self-sufficiency where the agricultural production of the inmates contributes to the facility's sustenance, making the inmates within the Davao Penal Colony engage more in farming and agriculture program as part of their rehabilitation process. And this includes the cultivation of crops and other related activities. And now we have the San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm. Whereas, San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm was actually established in the southern part of the Zamboanga and is considered as the oldest penal facility as it has been founded during or in the 1830 or during the Spanish regime. And it was actually established during the tenure of Governor General Ramon Blanco, who is the patron saint in the prison, or who is the patron saint the prison or the San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm named after. And this facility or this penal farm was actually or originally established per persons convicted of political crimes. During those time or during the establishment of this penal farm or this prison, ang main function nito is not to safekeep normal offenders or actual offenders, but to actually imprison those who are opposed in the Spanish regime. And besides from those reluctant political offenders that oppose to the Spanish rule, dito din nila kinukulong yung mga Muslim rebels. Because it was constructed in Zamboanga, and in Zamboanga, it is actually considered to be the area where a strong Spanish fortress is capable of protecting the Spanish interests. But during the Spanish-American War in 1888, it was eventually destroyed. But it is revived, however, under the Reorganization Act of 1905 and placed it under the Bureau of Prison, or now known as Bureau of Correction, to receive convicted prisoners in Mindanao. But even though na reconstruct na itong San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm, it is still considered to be the oldest penal facility or the first penal facility in the country. And lastly, we have the Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. This Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm was actually located in the Sablay Occidental, Mindoro, and was established on September 26, 1954 by the virtue of Presidential Proclamation number 72. Originally, this Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm was actually called Campo Prison and only a supply prison and penal farm in Occidental Mindoro. during the administration of the late President Ramon Magsaysay, and has a total of the land area, or it has a total of land area of 16,192 hectares. This colony, or this Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm, was actually established formally on January 15, 1995. And during this date, on January 15, 1955, it is the actual date where 7 officers from the Bureau of Prison, or again, now known as Bureau of Correction, actually set foot in this Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. And also, together with those 7 officers, 68 inmates from Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm and 1 inmate from the New Bilibid Prison has been transferred into this Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm. But today, this penal farm was actually converted into a friendly and accommodating rehabilitation area fully equipped with modern physical facilities. The distinctive qualities of this penal farm from the other penal institution or from the other facility is this Sablayan Prison and Penal Farm has actually new water supply system, rice and form production, and new conference room and modern hospital within the area or within the prison land. But just like any other national penitentiaries, or just like the 6 national penitentiaries that we have discussed earlier, the primary function or the primary goal of this institution is not only to enhance the aspects of the prisoner, but also to teach the prisoner how to develop their skills in order for them to become self-efficient and productive citizens with positive attitude and an outlook in life as they reintegrate into the or in the society or to the community.